Hello and welcome to the Defining Your Niche podcast, where we do a deep dive on alternative asset classes within commercial real estate. I'm your host, Thaddeus Campbell. He is Brett Copper, president and partner of Copper Storage Management. I was very lucky to be on a host of a call that Brett was one of the speakers on a few months back, blown away by his depth of knowledge, and really was excited when he accepted the offer to come on to the podcast. So Brett, first and foremost, want to thank you for coming and spending a half hour with us.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
So we start the podcast the same. You're kind of a unique. You're actually kind of one of the guys that I joke about when I ask people about storage, because most people don't set out to get involved in the storage industry. I always like to start the podcast by asking people's path to get into this facility, into this asset class, excuse me. Share your story with me a little bit, especially for those who maybe don't know the full story of Brett Copper.
Yeah, of course. So first and foremost, my dad, Bob Copper, started Self Storage 101, which is a consulting firm in the business. They specialized in feasibility studies and due diligence just about over 25 years ago. And so I'm 30 now. My earliest memories were going to the trade shows with Dad selling his books in the back of the room. And then as I got older, during the summers in school, I would go and do due diligence projects all over the country. So by the time I was 15, I'd probably been in 500 storage facilities in my life. And so it's hard to escape it. But at the time, I wanted to be, in music, wanted to maybe own a studio and do that side of it. Wanted to be anything other than self-storage. I thought it was very boring. And why would anyone want to do this? I got old enough to realize that, man, it's a stable business. And then I started to understand how much money self-storage makes. And then I just realized, in college, like, I know way more about this than I should because of all these years and having such a leg up on experience. And so after college, I went to the firm. Then I went to CubeSmart to learn third-party management and go through that route. And then in 2019, started Copper Storage Management, which was really the first, third-party management company for remote management. So that was a big piece that I wanted to build. And now I absolutely love it. I wouldn't do anything else. I wouldn't be in any other business. I hope self-storage is always successful because I don't know how to do anything else. I love this business for sure.
I love that. I'm going to do a little bit of a deep dive on this because as someone that got into storage at 47 years old, I'm now 51 and have had numerous other careers. And by the way, I'll tell you, not even doing close to what I was doing at 30 years old. And I learned a whole new business. So you'd be okay. Not that that's going to be a problem because I think storage is here to stay and going to be perfectly fine. This is such a unique asset class to me. And I've worked, as I said, in a bunch of different fields. Tell me about the people in this asset class, and you talked about how much you enjoy being in it and how much the interaction you talked about. Your dad has been in storage. You go to work at CubeSmart. You're then opening up your own third-party management. Yet there's this sense of camaraderie in the industry. I guess talk to me about that and maybe your thoughts on where it came from.
Yeah, we get that all the time from people that are coming into the industry, especially from any other industry. We get a lot of people that were in multifamily and hotel industry, pharmaceutical sales, people that have built up wealth and doctors' offices and all these places. It's a really strange conglomerate of, people. They come from absolutely everywhere, any age, any race, anywhere, that have just kind of heard that this business could be profitable. And when, multifamily really took a dive in COVID era and storage just absolutely exploded, they had to find other places to put it. So this industry has a unique no rivalry is really the best way to put it, where people are so open and honest, and you can go up and ask any owner at a trade show about their facility, how it's doing, the rates. People down the street from another facility are open and talk about it. They don't hold the cards close to their chest. Even the management companies, we all talk to each other. We're all friends. We all send business back and forth, and it's pretty much the exact same thing. I think the only exception would be the brokers. They're always pretty, and understandably, they're always more the sharks, but really everyone else is very open and understanding. And I think it has to do with it being such a micro market product. Most people are only competing in 3 miles. And so you don't have people that are that worried or scared or paranoid about people stealing business or doing things they shouldn't. Even on the top side, only 18% of facilities are managed by big management companies or the REITs. And that's a very small number.
Yeah.
So even those companies have camaraderie because we know we're never going to, encroach upon the other and take any business away. So yeah, it's definitely unique to say the least.
I'm going to go back to rewind to something you said. 2019, you're getting out of college. You decide to start a management company, thus Copper Storage Management, but you had a very specific niche. I want to ask why the idea of doing just fully remote third party management.
Yeah, first was I had seen what Red Dot and 10 Federal had been experimenting and kind of building. And so they were really two of the big first companies that experimented with remote management, but they weren't doing third party at the time. And for us, we wanted to start buying underperforming smaller assets again. We really wanted to ramp up and buy as much as we could. And so looking at how we were going to build out operations, I just couldn't justify getting a bunch of managers on site for sites that were going to be 200 units, right? Or
Yeah.
220 or 150. And so I thought, we're at a place now where technology has gotten very good. Websites have gotten good. Phones have gotten fast. QR codes are working, that we could probably build something that would work for the masses. But first and foremost was to build it for ourselves. It really came out of necessity. And then once we saw how well it worked and we looked around like, man, this is going to be popular. And then we got very lucky with COVID as far as that goes, because we started. Next thing you know, COVID hits. People can't do business and be there. And so next thing you know, there we are with a business that's exploding at the right time.
Isn't it nice sometimes when the serendipitous things happen? But I always talk to my partner about this. My two partners got into the value add game in 2020 and, just time the market really, really well. But on the flip side of that, there is the intelligence to kind of see that coming. So kudos to you for kind of seeing that. Hey, and storage has kind of lagged behind a little bit, I would say, in general to a lot of other asset classes as far as the implementation of technology. We're seeing that happen really rapidly now. Even the difference between 2019 and now in terms of the technology that's been being used. Talk to me a little bit about that and how that's allowed you and maybe how you're implementing some of the new things we're seeing in the market from a technology standpoint.
Yeah, of course. And you're completely right. This industry has been prehistoric compared to a lot of other industries. And
Yeah.
that's again because there's so many single owner operators across the board that have owned these facilities for so long in tertiary markets. And so they stayed full forever. They didn't do rate increases. So why do we need any technology? Well, now it's a much more competitive landscape. It's much more sophisticated. So in today's world, the ability to rent online, to use AI chatbots for a full checkout service, we've figured out that, in a lot of other companies, that it's much faster to have a tenant rent on their own phone or laptop than it ever has been with a manager. We
Yeah.
saw a store in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Obviously, Alabama University of Alabama is there. They rented 100 and I think 13 units in 2 days, all online, and you couldn't do that with a manager just
Right.
because it's not set. So
It's time.
first is the ease of checkout services, the ease of getting units and knowing where it's at, access control. And then now you're starting to see even more sophisticated technology like automated call centers that are using AI to get call quality improved. We've used that and it's been huge for us. AI chatbots like Swivel, for example, we use. I mean, we get about 8,000 interactions a month on our website, and we have roughly 35, 40,000 tenants. So that's a lot of calls we're cutting out that are directed to an AI chatbot, and people just prefer talking to it. I think a lot of it has to do with my generation and Gen Z now making up the two largest renting populations, in the country, and they're much more willing to use some of these services. And now you're seeing even more competitive products like Bluetooth locks that are on doors, or you're seeing people use advanced kiosks with virtual management. There are all sorts of new tech pieces hitting that I think are becoming more affordable. But AI is by far going to be the next big jump for us. We're already seeing products in the industry using it, but I think there is a huge list of implications in places that we could find to use AI in the business that will dramatically improve all of our quality of life, your employees' quality of life, and make us run the business more efficiently.
So I'm going to go back to something you said earlier about the big REITs managing less than 20% of the total facilities. The question is, given this transition to big technology, are we going to see a more rapid shift to kind of the maturation of this industry where kind of the people like yourself that are established, you have a really good number of stores that you're managing, and you have the ability to adapt at scale versus what storage has typically been, where it's always been kind of known as the mom and pop industry. You can own a facility or two or five or 10 and compete. Are we going to kind of see as technology comes in and the bigger players are maybe able to implement at more of a more rapid pace that we kind of see those smaller operators fall by the wayside?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, it's very similar what happened to multifamily, 15, 20 years ago, where you had a lot of individual private, owner operators that were running apartment complexes or so have you. Now that space is 75% REIT managed. I mean, it's unreal how much of that landscape, but it's more so out of necessity and efficiency. Management companies as a whole are always going to be better at driving income. They're going to be better at getting customer service done. They're going to be better at driving ancillary revenues and cutting costs because there's a huge incentive to be able to do so. And so you're getting these big private equity companies that were involved in all these other sectors are dumping billions into storage. Well, they're not going to run it themselves. So now that's growing the base for management companies and REITs. And even your individual owner operators are becoming more sophisticated where they're realizing, man, for about the same cost as I could run it, I can have, not have to deal with the day to day. We're going to get better returns, better valuation. And
Yeah.
that's really grown our business. I mean, when I think back 20 years ago, there were only a few big management companies. Now on ISS, you got a list of 50 to 100 in any size. So it's becoming more sophisticated. The more competitive it gets, the more people are going to need bigger companies and management companies to run it. It's not the same landscape we had, and so I think the more competitive it gets, it just necessitates having bigger and more efficient operations.
I love that. And this idea that we're shifting to, you talked about it earlier, like there's a camaraderie there,
Mm.
but there's like 50 players in this space now where you can go and have them operate. The idea of, I guess, running the facility yourself, and I guess the question I want to ask you, how you said a third party management company is going to be able to drive way more revenue. Like, just briefly, we're looking at solar on a facility we're building, right? And we think we're going to make $20,000 a year from solar credits. At a 6.5 cap, which is kind of where our valuation is on this particular facility, that's $300,000 of value to the property. And I'm putting that number out there for a specific reason.
Mhm.
You talked about being able to drive revenue. $20,000 of revenue in a year is
Yeah,
$300,000 in valuation on a property.
sure.
Why is it that the third party management company is going to be able to drive that revenue for you as say I'm the owner of the facility and I'm not, I try and run it myself versus the third party company. Why are they going to be able to drive that revenue that strongly?
Yeah, it's usually done in a few different ways. So one of the first and foremost is going to be the ability to do much more data based and professional revenue management. So that's first and foremost. We make more money in our business doing rate increases to the 90% of tenant base that are there instead of just getting our money from the 10% left that there is to rent. Rate increases are by far just a big staple in the business. And when you're buying stabilized assets, I mean that's how you're going to get the juice out of that property to be able to make your money. So first and foremost is that. I mean, any good management company and all of the top operators are going to have a really in-depth revenue management system. Typically, they're using other tools and automations or AI as well, like ProRise, for example, or a Veritech, that they're paying for these giant tools that can do better, more advanced algorithms that also deal with the data across the country so it can understand trends. And so when you have a team of people that are going in using that technology and doing it themselves, of really getting the most out of your tenant base, understanding the algorithms, that's always huge. You also get a lot of economies of scale, when you use those companies. So a lot of times you can cut a lot of other operational costs, like maybe your software costs, marketing costs, call center. A lot of companies don't charge for it, some do. And so you can cut some of those. The ability for better operations, you'll always find that management companies collect more late fees. They do auctions more quickly and efficiently. They don't do payment plans and allow people to get further into debt. Usually they'll do buyouts and say, look, you owe us 600 for $150. Just leave, get your stuff, and you're gone. That cuts out a huge loss for you over time. So there are a lot of efficiencies they've built up and just better training, I think, overall, right? Any of us that have our own call centers built in, a call center an agent might get 100 sales calls a day compared to that, manager or person that's running it themselves. And so over time, you get better specialization, which I think is always a big benefit to a business.
You mentioned something that we were on that call I talked about back in October with LiveSwitch and Radius Plus and James Hatfield from LiveSwitch. When I first talked to him and he talked to me about this idea of being able to get a text message on your phone, click a link, and have a live person talking to you that's not at the facility where you're at, it blew my mind. And you said something that I thought was probably the most powerful thing to me. As human beings, when we're doing something repeatedly over and over and over again, we tend to get better at it, right? My son knocks on doors for a living, right? As he knocks on 150 doors a day, he keeps getting better at his pitch because he's practicing it so much. If I'm sitting in a management office at one facility with 200 doors, like you said, and I'm the on-site manager, I might be seeing one or two people a day that I'm having a sales call with. How could I possibly be as good at selling that person what it is that's going to generate revenue versus somebody who's sitting in an office and they're talking to people from 20 different facilities and they might be talking to 30 or 40 people a day.
That's exactly right. I mean, you couldn't be more right. That's always been even the sales pitch for just getting a call center by itself. A lot of people say maybe you don't need full third party management, but you really in today's world should get a call center. I think the new stats from that SSA demand study in 2023, almost 80% of people rented from the first two facilities they called. So not only does the manager have to be really good at sales and closing it, but you have to answer the phone as soon as it rings, within seconds. And so if you have a manager sitting on site, they might be busy with other customers or outside or doing something else and miss that call. So I think you're also seeing a big driver for people getting into call centers, trying to get better operations for that point. And they're always better at sales, because of that volume that you just said. You just get way more experience for a sales team than the manager could ever have.
Yeah. Love that. And let's shift now. You brought up this idea of customer rate increases, and obviously ECRIs is a big topic in our industry right now. I first heard it January of 2024 at the New York Investment Summit. They had all the REITs, U-Haul, CubeSmart, Extra Space, NSA, Public, all on stage. And, this is a year and 2 months ago, and it just said flat out, this is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. It's working. It's proven to be working. So I want to get your opinion as somebody who's been in this industry for so long on this. I'm looking at a site down the street from me. I'm in New Jersey. I'm in a suburb of Philadelphia. It's a high $20 market for storage, right? $20 a square foot, $25 a square foot. There's a 10 by 10 being leased for $44, right?
Sure.
How powerful are ECRIs to you, and how are management companies over the long haul going to be able to give that initial rate at that low of a price and still be able to drive revenue in a market to where traditionally, if it's a $25 market, you need to be getting $200 plus a month on a 10 by 10. You're giving it away at 44. How is that working? I guess I would ask you first of all. And second of all, long term, how do you see this playing out? Do you see it as being something that's an effective long-term strategy?
That's a great question. I don't think it's too effective for the long term. So we started to see that really big during the COVID time, right around that 2018, 2019 going into COVID. You started to see some of those rate drops with the very quick and extensive rate increases. I mean, we have markets we're in right now where we're competing with REITs that have $11 10 by 10s. And so in a market where the 10 by 10 rate should be 120, 130, I mean, that's a long distance to be able to make up time. What they've found is in the short term to lease up a giant property in a competitive market, that works very, very well as far as getting people in, getting bodies. But they've noticed after a few years that they're getting way less new leads in those same markets because they've done so many rate increases so aggressively. It's built up a reputation, whether that be through reviews, people that are there, that you're losing out on a big chunk of return tenants. So you have to be really, really careful for how long you do it, how aggressive the rate increases are. I mean, we still have facilities that the only way to rent is going to be, having the lowest rates in the market and lease up. It all depends on how competitive, but you really want to get away from that strategy as quickly as possible and start doing healthier, higher street rates coming in. So that way it's nowhere near the rock of the boat to be able to get people up the rest of the way. And we're seeing, instead of doing that rate increase in the first 3 months, maybe it makes sense to do 4, 5, or 6 for that first rate increase. You don't want to be too overly zealous like we're seeing with some of the REITs have done. So you really have to be careful, look at the market. And if we've got now 150 stores, we probably have at least 100 different, revenue management, parameters set up for each one that are very different and customized. And that's for that same reason. Each market's not exactly the same. So you do have to be careful trying to use that very aggressive rate strategy.
Appreciate your insight onto that so much. You mentioned something earlier which I found fascinating because they're things you don't even hear about if you're not tied into a world like we're tied into in self-storage. These big data companies that you're able to get information from, and again, going back to our earlier point about the economy of scale and why at this point in the storage business it's important to have that ability to be able, because that's not cheap information, but it's unbelievable the amount of information now that you have access to if you have the resources to go get it to drive those decisions in your algorithm on how you're going to shift prices.
Oh, yeah, exactly right. I mean, even if you just took the data that each management company has with just their base, right? Because, when you get over 100 stores and, you're in maybe 20 states, that's a really good sample size to understand what's happening. And then good companies can then look at things like the demographics that are causing it, or what are the similarities between these stores that might be in different places, the asset type where we know A class stores perform typically with these factors, and our C class stores that might be very tertiary perform with these. The more management and experience that a company can get over a larger number of stores, the better it's going to be. You make much more informed decisions. I can tell you, though, that the facility management softwares like Storable, for example, and StoreEdge, or that they now just rebranded to Edge, has an AI component they're building out that will give that insight to individual owners. So you can basically share in that data insight across, their entire portfolio, where it'll say, what do you recommend? I saw the demo for it. You can ask the software, what do you recommend for my 10 by 10s? And it goes in and calculates using all this data and says, yeah, if you were to raise it by $3, you would only lose one more rental a month, but you would get, $200 in additional income. The insights are incredible, and it's only going to get better. So I think individual owner operators are going to have some access to better data and tools with the facility management softwares. It just might take a little bit of time for those to be really robust and accurate.
Gone are the days of and I always laugh when I go on Radius Plus and I see a list of it gives you the local facilities with their rents over the last year, and you see that store where it's like the price has been the same going back two,
Mm-hmm.
3 years. Those days are really gone. Like if you're operating it that way, you're not going to maximize the profitability of your facility.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Something I wanted to ask you, we were at ISS. My first time, it's not ISS, SSA. We're taping this a week after SSA. It'll air in a couple of weeks. So right before ISS comes,
Mhm.
we were at SSA a week ago in Orlando. That was my first trade show, was Orlando in 2022, was my first experience with the people in self-storage. Interested to get your take on obviously 2022. It was like the height of the COVID boom, right? They had not yet raised interest rates. That happened a month after SSA. It was like as excited as you could possibly be. Still really strong excitement I felt like in Orlando last week. It was certainly wasn't a negative vibe in any way, shape, or form from my perspective, but I want to get Brett Copper's perspective on how you felt about the trade show and where you see the enthusiasm for storage going over the next couple of years.
Yeah, of course. And you're right about COVID. I mean, we had record numbers across the industry. We had the highest rate increases, highest occupancy jumps. I mean, you could basically not answer the phone and keep a facility full. It was that the demand
Yeah.
was that high across the board, supply was that low. And then when we got into 2023, we saw the opposite. We had a huge slowdown, probably one of the largest dips the industry's ever experienced,
Never
both
seen.
on a rent per square foot and occupancy. We were sitting at around, as an industry, 94% occupancy
It's
during COVID,
crazy.
95, and it dropped all the way to 81, 82 in 2023. Now, in reality, a lot of people panicked, but the problem is, if you bought stores and were conservative with your numbers and estimates and you based it more on pre-COVID, you really
You're
weren't
fine.
panicked at all when those rates fell. It was more of basing it on the height of a bubble where people just thought this is going to continue, and it was impossible to continue. Any expert in the industry were yelling that from the rooftops, that it has to end anytime. And I think it caught some people by surprise. So 2023 was very slow. 2024, we saw some improvements year over year on both rental rates, about 20% or so with our stores. Occupancy was up probably another 6-7%.
Yep.
Now, the beginning of this year, already in January and February, we had the two best months we've had in years,
That's
um, which
awesome.
which bodes very well for the rest of the industry. I mean, we buy and manage a lot of tertiary, secondary, medium, smaller size facilities, which is what the majority of people own. And for us to see jumps in markets that have been slow for a long time and big jumps, I think is extremely good for the industry. And I would agree with you at the show. It was much more positive than the last few
Yeah.
quarters of shows have been, where everyone seemed that their business was picking up, whether that's on brokers, new builds, acquisitions, on rental rates or anything else. It seemed like everyone had picked up pretty well.
I'm interested to pick your brain. January and February are not prime months, even in Sunbelt states for storage.
Yep.
Not a typical time where people are doing a lot of moving, which tends to drive storage demand. What do we attest to that improvement early this year?
I think part of it is always going to be, no matter which side of an election you sit on, doesn't matter to me. But no matter what, everything slows down in election year and everything leading up to an election. The money coming into the business, banks wanting to lend out, financial institutions, private equity, individual owners and operators that are wanting to get in or maybe sell their properties. Everyone holds their breath. They wait for an election to be done. And then no matter who wins, you start to see a giant pickup in business again. Everything, starts to go forward. What really helps are the lowering of interest rates. I mean, that's our biggest driver in the business. It drives people buying and selling properties, building properties, and it drives every tenant that rents at a facility. The vast majority are moving or buying vehicles or renovating a house or pulled out another mortgage or whatever that might be. And so
Yeah.
you've seen with interest rates going down made a boom. And I think people are more confident right now in their finances at the start of this year than they've been in the last couple of years. People probably feel a little bit safer, like everything's settled down. Okay, we don't have to worry about any big changes coming up. And so we're starting to see a big boom. But I think a lot of it had to do with leading up to a very volatile election year, I guess you could call it. No matter which side it was,
Yeah.
people get stressed about it. And then once that's over, it was almost like, okay, let's get back to the real world, back to business. And we've seen a much more normal growth than we've seen the last couple of years.
Brett, as I expected when I first sat with you on the show we did back in October, and then saw you at SSA and asked if you come on the podcast, was super excited because your intelligence level is off the chart. I'm going to say this, you are a credit to people whose parents led them into an industry. And I found this so much in self storage. People like yourself, John Lindsay, who I've had on the podcast, Alex
Great guy.
Burnham, who's one of the,
Yep.
you guys who grew up in this industry, there's not that feeling of like entitlement or for lack of a better term, assholeness from somebody.
Sure.
You've been nothing but kind and share information, and I'm just so grateful and just want to give you credit. Pass that along to your dad and mom too, because they've raised a great guy. For me, as somebody who is newer in the industry, I haven't even been in it for 4 full years yet. It's so cool to have people like yourself that are willing to share and willing to give information that I otherwise wouldn't know. And as you said earlier, there's this camaraderie in this asset that it just doesn't exist in other places. So I want to thank you so much for that. Before I sign off, somebody's interested in getting a hold of you. They have an asset that they're looking for management for. What's the best way for somebody to get a hold of Brett Copper and get your assistance in running their operation?
Of course. Yeah. You can just email me directly or go to our website. My email is Brett, BRETT, .copper, like the metal, at copper, S as in Sam, M as in management.com. Or you can just go to copperstoragemanagement.com and that'll also go to me. I wanted to thank you, by the way, for having us on. Really also appreciate your kind words. Trust me, I did not used to be this way, especially when I was younger. And then I got old enough and realized my dad was much smarter than me. And from that point on, my life has been way easier once I succumbed to that. So thank you, really, thank you for having me on and for also having on other great people in the industry. It means a lot. But I really do appreciate your time with you, and I would come on anytime you want.
So appreciate it, and we'll look forward to having you back on again. I'm actually taping another episode in a half hour with a couple of returnees.
Nice.
We're getting to that point. It's a kind of a cool place to be in the podcast where people are coming back on for us. It's been long enough since I talked to them. There's new stuff to talk about. I had a really cool moment I'll share at the SSA show where there were two people that had been on the podcast sitting in the cafe having a meeting with each other. And I was like, man, this is pretty cool. I've had enough people on the podcast now where at trade shows they're meeting with each other and I get to see it. So appreciate the kind words from you as well. That's it for this week's episode of the Defining Your Niche podcast. He's Brett Copper, president of Copper Storage Management. I'm Thaddeus Campbell, your host. If you got anything of value, please leave a comment. We're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts. Give us a follow and let us know what you think. Also, always looking for great guest ideas. So if you have a guest idea, somebody you think would be great for the show, please reach out to me and let me know. We'll see you guys next week.